Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Grit Grace Gratitude. And I'm Anisa Taron, and this is my, as I said in the post, wise and beautiful co-host Jamila. And she's looking ever so radiant there today. I don't know if she had some lovely date on that she's looking the part for it, but she's looking stunning as always. So the
Listen,
topic of today, yeah,
I was
what
about
were
to
you saying?
ask you the same before we got on because you're looking particularly very smart. What's been going on here? You need to fill me in, eh?
Listen, it's my daughter's lipstick today. I just said to her, give me some lipstick so I don't look so dull for the day because I'm wearing grey. And then I decided I'm going to pop it with a beautiful purple um, pashmina from Turkey. And I was like, no, that's okay. So as much as everything else is grey, I'll brighten up the rest.
You're bringing the color back into everything. You look stunning.
Thank you, my darling. So do you want to introduce the topic of today, Jamila?
No, Anissa, you go right ahead. You do it so
Yes.
well.
So today's topic is inspired, I suppose, by Mother's Day that's coming up. Now, I don't know for our international guests if they also have Mother's Day at the same time that we do, Jamila. I'm not really sure. But nonetheless, we get to celebrate it on the 12th, which is this coming Sunday. And this topic was really inspired by Jamila, and I love the idea behind it because, parenthood is sort of connected to our identities. And the only contribution I added was, I suppose, a lot of our mother and father wounds also contribute in how we are as parents, and then also how, we raise our kids and what we choose to do with that in terms of coming back to the theme of the segment, stay in that grudge state, or do we move forward with grit, grace, and gratitude? Extending grace to even our own parents. Um, I know of many parents out there that have narcissistic moms or dads, and how that plays a role. I think that would be an entirely um, a separate segment on its own to host, Jamila. But
Mm.
ideally, what we're going to talk about today is really how becoming a parent shapes your sense of self, your identity, the purpose, and the journey of self discovery along that. And we'll delve into sort of some of the intricacies of being a single parent and what does that mean? And not just a single mother, but also a single dad raising his kids all by himself. And what are some of those circumstances that dictate why that happens? And more importantly, how intergenerational traumas play a role for us in parenthood and how we show up. So let's kick off, Jamila. I mean, this is quite a deep topic for today, but we'll try and bring some lightness to it as well.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Thank you, Anissa, for that lovely introduction and introduction to our topic for today. And I think it's quite pertinent for us to discuss this, especially in view of us celebrating Mother's Day and what it means
Mm-hmm.
to different people and what it means to someone who is in a strong relationship or a marriage and how they would relate to Mother's Day, to someone like you and I. And this, as you said, extends also not just to the mums out there, but to the single dads out there, And I mentioned to you yesterday is that I love that meme that goes out every Mother's Day and Father's Day. And like for Mother's Day, it would be Happy Mother's Day to all the single fathers out there, because you literally have to fill both roles of mum and dad, and that's quite a challenging task to take on. But I think also parenthood is such a transformative experience in someone's life, and it has such a huge impact on your sense of self and your identity. we go through such profound changes in our identity and our purpose ultimately, upon becoming parents. So I hope that people will share their comments and their experiences with us. And as you say, it is a very deep topic. It is a very serious topic. But at the same time, I think by sharing our experiences, our trials and errors as we've gone along, we can also bring a light aspect to it. Because I mean, I'm sure you in hindsight look at certain experiences which might have felt like it was the end of the world at that particular time, but now years later you look back at it and you actually chuckle at how you responded to it, or how you held up your own for it at that time. And I think with parenthood, it is all about trial and error, isn't it? Because no one really does give you a handbook as such for preparing you for when you get back home with that newborn baby. And that's when it hits you, because prior to that you're reading about your pregnancy and um, the growth of your baby, and it's all very exciting, and you're excited because you want to do the baby shower and all the rest of it. And everybody seems to be involved at that stage, until you come home with this new little being in your hand and you come to the realization, oh my God, I have this whole human life that I'm responsible for. So lots of challenges, lots of shifting priorities, your values change, and it is quite an experience. It is quite a milestone in your life.
I couldn't agree more, Jamila. When you said about the handbook, it's so interesting. I just got off a call just about an hour and a half ago with a colleague of mine, and we were talking about who is like we don't speak often, like maybe twice a year we get to chat just to check in. And we were talking about our kids and where they are in their life stage, even. And so, whilst the newborn brings that particular set of challenges, I mean, the firstborn was colic. Oh my gosh. And, I didn't have a support structure. I had no idea. And we were just saying that at first, we felt guilt in the way that we parent sometimes, but we then said today, we're more liberated now because, gosh, nobody, not a single person, said there was a handbook to do this. And it's not a one size fits all approach, right? Because each home, each child is different. Whilst the firstborn of mine had colic, and I was going through some probably not diagnosed officially, but I definitely had postnatal, a little bit of depression, because there was a time that I felt like I wanted to shove my baby underneath the bed, take him and, like, I'm saying this publicly because this is something that women struggle with. I wanted to take him and throw him against the wall. Like, I didn't know what to do. I was fortunate that his colic was 3 o'clock in the afternoon till 9 at night. So it wasn't the 3 a.m. in the morning till 9 a.m. in the morning. So there was, now looking back, I could say that. But then I was overwhelmed. I was sitting with this grudge and resentment, and I was like, this motherhood is not meant for me. It's not. I hated every single bit of it. And it's not because I hated my baby. It was inexperience. Nobody warned you about the dark side of becoming a parent. And then nobody warned you about your own insecurities, and those wounds that you have as a child yourself, as a younger child, and what you weren't given as a child. So it all surfaces in those moments when you become a mother, right?
Absolutely, Anissa. And I just want to touch on that postpartum depression. And like, up until recently, society made it such that that wasn't even a real thing. And so a lot of mums who were experiencing it would have these feelings that it's their fault. It's that they are not strong enough, that they are too weak, that they are inadequate at being parents, or that they were just looking for attention. But this is such
Mm,
a huge issue for women who go through this, and it often culminates in suicidal ideation, and it's a real issue for people to go through, for women to go through, and it often sometimes ends in the divorce, in divorce of the relationship, because
yes.
they cannot, because there's no treatment for it, because they are not able to speak to anybody about what they're going through. It escalates and escalates to a point where they cannot be in the relationship anymore, and normally blame
Mm,
is put onto the woman. So another thing is that if you do not have a strong support structure, it's extremely daunting and overwhelming, especially for a first time mom,
mm,
to experience this, because you don't know what to do. Some of us have been fortunate in that your mom is still alive, or the grand is still alive, or you have sisters or sisters-in-law or a mom-in-law who will help you through it because they've all gone through it. But others are literally left on their own with this new experience, this new incredible responsibility that's left
mm.
purely on your shoulders, to take on. So it's definitely a very daunting reality for a lot of young mothers to go through. And sometimes this, their first pregnancies are okay, but then later on in subsequent pregnancies, or births, then it comes on, the postpartum depression comes on. So it really
Yes. Yeah.
doesn't, it's not specific to just when you've had your first child. It can happen to you on your third child, the
It's
birth
so.
of your third child. But like I said, it is just so important for you to have a support structure, which brings me to the thought of, what about all those single moms out there who have had nobody and have
Yeah.
now this new baby to take care of all by themselves? You and I have gone through our divorce, and our
Mm,
kids, I mean, my son was 6 at the time, um, and it was so difficult for me. But I can only
mm,
imagine and sympathize with someone who is a new first time single mom and going through this and having to deal with not having a proper strong support structure,
mm.
or going through postpartum. It's almost inconceivable for me to try to imagine what they would be going through.
Yeah, for me, it was, at that starting point, I did only have occasionally my mother-in-law, actually, because I had, well, I won't call it an estranged relationship, but it wasn't a type of relationship, a traditional relationship with my mom where she was there at the birth, she was there,
Mm,
for every milestone. It never was like that, and today isn't still. I don't bear any grudges to my mom because, again, she did not receive that kind of love, affection, and it would be a different theme to talk about in the next segment. But if she didn't grow up with her own mom or dad or from a complete home, she's got her own abandonment issues and not feeling loved like and neither feeling like she belonged. So the only thing I could extend to my mother as I became a mother was grace, because in
mm,
those moments, even though I was not a single mom, I felt alone because there were
yeah.
no brothers or sisters. And because my family, there isn't me of knowing cousins and nieces and nephews and aunts, there was nobody to come around besides
Mhm,
occasionally mother-in-law. So
mm,
hence you can imagine it was traumatic. I only connected with my firstborn, and let's also keep in mind it's the type of birth that you also have when you didn't expect. Let's talk about before becoming a mother. If you
mm,
did not expect to have a a cesarean and you had all good intentions to have natural birth. And then the older folk, i.e., even our mother in laws, mine especially, would say, well, this younger generation, they just want to have it easy and have cesareans, and they go with gynecologists that, can schedule it accordingly. But that's not what I wanted. So now you're dealing with becoming a new mom, having had a
Yes.
cesarean, which you did not want, and the guilt of, well, you didn't want to go through the labor pains. Who cares if you had your child naturally delivered or via cesarean?
Yes.
Nonetheless, you brought a life into this world, right? And then you go on the next guilt trip of, hey, you need to breastfeed your baby and you need to do it for a long period of time.
Mm.
Who the hell says that's necessary? If you can, by all
Mm.
means, go ahead. I was blessed to be able to. But for those moms that weren't, my sister's just had a baby and it's about a month old. And I asked her, like, how's things going with breastfeeding? And she said, oh my gosh, she's already been quite skinny. She says, no, this kid is drinking me to the point where I'm going to look anorexic. And then I said to her, well, you choose what you want. But
Mm.
society places these burdens and this feelings of guilt and that we're not good enough. And I
Mm.
think it's utter rubbish. I don't know about you.
Absolutely, I
Hello,
agree
Sarah.
totally.
There's a Sarah De Brain that has joined us on Instagram. Thank you for joining us. Do interact
Well,
and share your views.
welcome, Sarah. Yeah, Anissa, the cultural and societal expectations that are placed on a new mom are they can be so detrimental to the person. Because like you say, there's that expectation of what type of a birth you choose to have. There's the expectation then of whether you are going to breastfeed or not. And fortunately for you, you were able to. But for me, I had every intention to, but my child just never was able to latch on properly enough, or the milk was just not enough. And you feel this incredible guilt because you're having people
Exactly.
saying to you, like the mums-in-law out there, or the aunts-in-law, or whoever it might be, relaying how successful they were at being able to
Yes,
do this. And then you feel like, oh my gosh, there must definitely be something wrong with me then, because this is supposed to be something so natural. It's supposed to be something that I can just do, and it's my inherent ability to, but it actually isn't.
yes,
And then you have to consider also the circumstances and the environment that you have found yourself in while you were pregnant, because that
mm,
affects
mm,
you after you've given birth. It affects your child and their whole equilibrium and the state that they find themselves in. So when you find that a woman has had a very difficult pregnancy where she's under extreme amounts of stress, you would find that the child is very colicky or unsettled. And I found that with my son. So
mine
with the
too.
colic,
Mm,
and the fact that he wasn't latching on, it was just unbearable pressure on me. Apart from everything else, and having to deal with you and your state of mind and your new body at this stage, it's a lot
mm.
for a woman to go through.
Agreed,
Um,
agreed. When you just spoke about what we go through during the pregnancy, I remember I had the dynamic of, I'm Muslim and my husband at the time reverted to Islam, and his parents were like already not happy that he became Muslim, and now they have a grandchild. And then the bloody name of what the child was going to be called caused so much tension that for 6 months of my pregnancy, I stayed away from my in-laws because there was so much fighting around what is the child's name going to be and how our family going to pronounce it. And that caused a lot of stress on me, and rightfully so. In retrospect, it is the reason why my child was so colicky, the firstborn, and why even today, if I look at between the three kids, he is a bit more, sensitive to very different nuances in his life. And he does go
Mhm.
into this anxious state and depressive state. But it makes sense. That was me in my pregnancy and
Correct.
post delivering him, right?
Mm. Mm. And it's all about readjusting now to this new self. And it's not this new
Mm.
self on how you think about what your emotions are like, but it's also adapting to this new body of yours. And
Yes.
that's quite a lot to take in as well.
Listen,
That's why I
I
say to
gained
you
20
today,
kgs. 20.
wow, I can't even
Oh God.
imagine that.
Listen, it was like, in the first 7 months, you like buy the book and you do things that's good. And I think I recall putting on 12 kilos and it was on track, like politically correct on track, right? In that, in that last 2 months, I just packed it on and I put on 8 kilos. And before you know it, it was like 20 kgs. I was like, holy crap, who is this woman? The
Yeah.
swollen nose, everything was heavier, and you start to feel like a whole different person.
Hmm.
And so you
And
have an identity thing going on, an identity
correct,
crisis going on. Talk to us about that
correct.
for yourself.
Geez, my gosh. And this is the thing is that parenthood brings about this whole identity crisis versus identity enhancement. And your
Yes.
contrasting experiences that you have can trigger a person towards either having an identity crisis or it enhances your sense of self.
Mm,
Or
mm.
you literally do have both experiences, which is more, I feel like, the case. Because there's some days where you just, you want to pull all your hair out and you don't know who this person is looking back at you in the mirror. And other days that you feel like, okay, I got this, I'm not doing too
Yes.
badly at this, I can give myself a pat on the back. But yeah, it can be the most rewarding and the most traumatic period that you can go through. But I think something else that brings a lot of stress to young parents is about your parenting style, because
Mm.
someone always knows better than you do. And when
Mm.
you're living when you're living in like an extended family situation, then you're the newbie who knows absolutely nothing, and this is how it's been done for generations to come
Mhm.
prior to you, and it's going to be happening way after you. But I think a lot of parenting styles have changed because we've changed and we've evolved. And
Mm.
when you look at grandparents also, it's almost as if like, I didn't know who my father was. It was all of a sudden like, who are you? This is not the parent that I remember who grew me up, because everything that I was restricted to do or I was not allowed to have as a young child growing up, all of a sudden my son was given carte blanche. He could do just about anything he wanted to. And my
Yes,
parent,
I know
my dad would question me on why I would say or make a certain decision, when I say to him, but that's what you would say to me. That's how you brought me up. So why do I change it now? So parenting styles are very different. And I think that as a young parent, it's really important to believe in yourself and,
that.
to stand behind what your convictions are. Because
Mm.
the way that we grew up was different, because the society in which we grew up was totally different to the ones that we are bringing our kids up in or brought our children up in. The way
Yes.
that life, the meaning of life, I suppose, and the relationships we had, the connections that we had were very, very different. Even the relationship between parent and child was completely different back in the day to what it is now. So as much as I'm not saying that, my son is my friend, and that is the basis of our relationship, where we on, a friend versus friend. But I mean, I still hold true to the fact that your role as a parent needs to be discerned and distinguished and known. But at the same time, there has to be that freedom, that comfort, that ease for your child to know that they can come to you with absolutely anything. And for that fear I think we used to have a fear, but for it now to rather be dissipated and seen as a respect for the parent.
Jamila, I go back to, in my first experience of becoming a mother, I was, by the book. Let the child self-soothe. Let them, don't pick them up. Let them try and get into routine. So I was extremely, insanely by the book. Only years later, psychiatrists and psychologists, well, more psychiatrists discovered, I think Dr. Gabo Mate also speaks about it. When you're leaving your child to self-soothe like that, it's traumatic, because they actually were in your womb, attached to you, lying beneath like your heart, and that heartbeat being connected to them. Now they're in this new unknown foreign world, and apart from you, I didn't believe in having the baby in my bed or next to me in its own room. I was blessed to be able to have a room separate, but it was naive. So whilst I was reading a book on what to do, it was just a perspective. So you raise a valid point in terms of whether it is reading material at that moment in time when you become a parent, it is just an interpretation of how it might have worked for that individual, or if it's the in-laws or family members saying, but this is actually what you're needing to do. I believe my son, my firstborn, had a lot of allergies because my mother-in-law introduced food as early as 4 months, saying the child is hungry, but you could have exclusively breastfed for 6 months, as per the nurses. So I feel that there's just so many outside influences that make us feel like we are an imposter as mothers, and that doubt also goes into our parenting styles and leads into the future state of, I suppose, if I look at that inadequate feeling of being a mom, it impacts our relationships with our partners. Now, let's not even talk about the physical changes in your body. And now you've got this baby. Now you're feeling like an imposter. The child's got colic or whatever. Child doesn't sleep through if there's no colic. Now you're expected to still be a wife. So it is insane. It is as somebody said, your children can either make or break your marriage. And it's so true. It is so true.
I think, Anisa, it's not our children that can, but it's our, it's the emphasis that we place on our children.
Talk to me more about your perspective on that.
That can make or break a marriage. Because when my son was born, I'll admit, I kept him in my bed for as long as I could.
Different strokes for different folks.
I would sit up at night and I'd literally look at him all night, because I just needed to know that he's breathing and that he's okay. And also the amazement of, this actual little being that came out of my body, and is finally has made his appearance. But having said that, I kept him in my bed, and then I was divorced when he was 6 years old, and we moved to a new city. We knew nobody here. It was just the two of us. So we would cuddle every night together and literally just hang on to each other because that's all we had. We just had each other. And as he, grew, and he was like, "Mom, I think I'm old enough now to be in my bed." And then he didn't want to be,
Yes.
as close, physically close as I would want to. And then as you go along, they don't want you to kiss them before you drop them off at school, and they start to gain their own independence. And for me, I think as it was difficult to go through, because you have to adjust now to this new normal, and you have to adjust to the fact that they are not so dependent on you anymore. But it's
Yes.
actually a smooth transition that you can accept, because I felt like I had him to myself for all those years. Whatever time and physical closeness we could have had, we did have. But yeah, it's certainly something that is difficult to go through. And also it's different for each parent, and it's different
Yeah.
not only for the parent, but it's different, I suppose, with each child that you have, because you're changing. So your parenting
Yes.
style would change. Also, with a second and a third child, you know a lot more. So you're a lot more experienced, and that overwhelming um, insecurity that you felt as a new mom isn't really there, or wouldn't really be there for your second or your third child. But having said that, it doesn't mean that because you've gone through one, it'll progressively get better. You cannot say that. It just depends on your stage. It depends on your environment. It depends on what you're going through in your life that determines these behaviors and reactions in both the parent as well as the child. But yeah, it's by no means an easy journey. And one more thing, Anissa, is that you look at the evolution of parenthood, or the evolution of the parent, and how it changes as you continue to evolve, as your children grow, because the way that you would um, handle certain issues or experiences when they're younger compared to when they're older is totally different. So different types of behavior, different reactions that you have will change according to the different stages that your child is in. And
Totally.
this could mean one thing to someone who is single and bringing up a child alone, but it's different also for those that are in a marriage and bringing up children together, because like you say, your relationship changes, because your priorities now are placed um, generally more so on the child. And this is
Yes.
when the relationship between the spouses starts to deteriorate, because in as much as, and I think it's just something that's maternal and natural for moms to be overly possessive and to place priority on the child compared to any other relationship that you may have, including the one that you have with yourself, because we always put the children up above. We prioritize them. We prioritize maybe them over the marriage, which is the one of the worst things that you can do,
For sure.
because
For sure.
yeah, because I mean, the relationship or the foundation is between the spouses, and as the kids come along, they come through you, right? They're not your possession.
Yes.
So there's a lot to deal with in that, and this, I think it just comes with the experience. It comes with people who are around you who can help you. It comes with the education that we receive online through people like Dr. Mate Gabor and Dr. Shefali, who relay their experiences, who relay the lessons that they've learned, who unpack the generational experiences and expectations that are placed on us and allow you to look at it from a different perspective.
I can respond to a few things that you've just mentioned. I mean, the second baby for me and the third was definitely different. Whereas I probably went out with my firstborn only after 5 months of having him out, when I mean out, going out in public and doing things alone with him. When the second was born, she was with me as early as 6 weeks. I went to gym and I left her, at the play area for them to take care of her. But I was okay with that because I was different. You're saying that you are a different person. You have an idea of what to expect. And I waited almost 3.5 years. So there was a bit more experience and a bit more knowing what to expect. Never mind, she was very attached to me and didn't want to go to anyone because I was forever carrying her on this Kango pouch thing. And even up until today, being the only girl, she is quite clingy to me. They say mommy's boys and daddy's girls, but it's kind of a reverse with me. So I also think there's this myth of just generalizing in that regard. The third time you have a baby, it's like, and there's a 4.5 years difference between my second and my third one, and 8 years with the firstborn. But why I'm sharing this is also because that relationship dynamic, be it with your spouse, be it with your in-laws, or even your own parents as you are raising your kids, brings about a lot of what our own personal insecurities are and what are our projections of what we didn't get from our own parents. So what then tends to happen is that we go into almost, well, I certainly am going to speak for myself. I was very much more into my masculine as a mother and not as nurturing. But that was just a symptom of my household at the time, being the provider and going to work in corporate. It was par for the course. It's who I was, right?
Yeah.
So the kids did not get to experience a nurturing mom that was so attached and made the kids the world. It was a very different environment and dynamic in my home again. And yet, it's interesting that even that in and of itself became very much how we inflict the wounds and trauma onto our kids. Because now we're not being that nurturing mother because I didn't receive nurturing as a kid. I didn't know what it was to be told I love you or come, I'm going to hug you, or because I
Yeah.
didn't grow up with mother and neither did I grow up with dad, as we discussed not so long ago on the segment. So me coming from not a whole traditional family setup, it was inevitable that I was probably going to be more in my masculine anyway, whether I was the breadwinner or not, or whether I was working corporate hours. It was just innately not part of me at those times to know how to extend the love language that my kids needed. It's only as I grew older and I realized the self-sacrificing that was happening as a mom, as a wife, as a daughter-in-law, as a daughter, whatever the roles are. And when I had to dig deeper as to what those wounds were, that was deep mother and father wounds. That is why I added this addition to the segment around parenthood and self discovery and that identity crisis that we have, because what and how, what we went through as kids. You said it even earlier on, your dad was not that way with you. And so you kind of wanted to do exactly the same with your kid, but your dad's giving a different
Mm.
grandparent approach to your child, yet you didn't experience him that way.
Yes.
So the mother and father wounds that we have is something that we really need to take heed of as parents. And I
Mm.
have a lot of these conversations with all my kids. Well, not my youngest is not going to understand, he's 9. But with my 2 older ones, I speak about my mother wounds and father wounds and how I was poor as a parent at the start, and how those projections that came out was pretty much how I was raised by in inverted commas, the caregivers that I was placed in their care, right? And it was an aggressive, harsh way, a judgmental way, that critical, controlling parent style. So it's only normal that I would show up in that way. Can we flip the script? Absolutely. But the societal pressures doesn't make it easy.
No.
And your circumstances in your home environment may also dictate to not make that easier, but we have choice. So I today can say that I have a lot of these conversations when a single mom's parents or dads, and the reverse, some moms are absent. They're not around in the way that they need to be for their kids. If the dad is the single parent, and in our case, we are the single mothers, right? And this creates some deep, deep rooted wounds for our children because they start to question their identities, their sense of belonging, and whether they're worthy or good enough. And so they also then delve into and repeat the people pleaser, hero, rescuer, savior personalities because they believe that if they do that, that's how they're going to attract love and attention. So I very often tell my daughter, be mindful that you are going to have a father wound because, and yours would be deeper than mine. My father doesn't know I exist. And so there's a wound, but there's more a hole in the soul, not knowing who my father was and him not knowing me. You knew your dad. You had him there for the first, how old is she now? 13, 10 years of your life. Same for my older one. So their wounds are a little bit deeper, and not saying the 9-year-old doesn't have that, but it's so vital for us then to understand what is our unhealthy parenting ways that have come across and unintentionally hurt or damaged our kids' little spirits and still continues because we have this unconscious pathologies that are quite deep rooted, and it's something we have to shift and be mindful to shift. So it's whilst people think it's not important to have these conversations, I deeply want to encourage parents, go and talk about your own wounds. Let your children see
Absolutely.
and understand that you're flawed, and so that we can break the intergenerational curses that existed within our family, and they can ultimately become torchbearers within their own home environments to have more conscious parenting. Because while Dr. Shafali is there as a resource today, and Dr. Gabo Mate talks about trauma and this deep-rooted um, cells that sitting within ourselves that we were traumatized as kids, is how we're treating our kids, right? And very much also that our inner wounded child is when we react in to our kids if they're not doing certain things in a certain way. It's actually your own inner child that's reacting there. So it is so extremely vital, whether you're the single dad or the single mother, take heed of knowing what your role is in perpetuating the cycle of the mother and the father wounds, or both.
Yeah. No, you've absolutely um, focused on so many relevant and pertinent points there, Anissa. And I think for me, becoming one of the gifts or lessons that I've learned from becoming a parent is the understanding of where my mom was and why she behaved the way that she would have behaved. I used to always question whether she did love me because she was very hard in her approach in the relationship, in the sense that she wasn't very physically or verbally affectionate. She was there and she was a fantastic mom and she was a provider and somebody to look up to, and she was an incredible host, and in all terms she was perfect. But when it came to me, this is how I felt, and I think it was emphasized a lot because she had a very close relationship with my older sister. And so there was a lot of insecurities that I developed within myself which I'll still
Mm-hmm.
have today and that I've not completely, totally
Mm,
addressed yet. And I don't know whether it is possible to completely address them all, but there's a process that I went through in my reaction to my mom being the way that she was, and where it was initially like I felt um, such negative feelings towards her, because obviously I felt like I was inadequate and I wasn't good enough, which mom doesn't
mm,
show affection to their daughter, or and especially I was the youngest. So I always felt that there was something lacking in me. There was something that
mm,
quite wasn't enough. Only to years later, and after I had my own child, and after I've started doing the work on myself and going through theta healing and doing cord cutting exercises and really getting to know more about, um, like you say, the generational implications of how it affects our life and the being that we are today, um, did I realize and uncover that, or took the time to really put the anger aside, put the insecurities aside, put me aside, and try to understand who my
mm.
mom was and what her life was. And because she was a
Yeah.
young child who had also gone through parents being divorced, and her mom had to go back to India, which left her in an extended family household where her dad wasn't very present in her life, and feelings of belonging but not really belonging. Um,
Mm,
and I think that her approach was to make me as strong as I possibly could be. Um,
yeah.
and maybe that was why the affection wasn't shown. But it by no means meant that she didn't love me, or that
Yeah.
she didn't believe in me, or that she wanted the best for me. So all these years later, I can understand where she was coming from. I can start to look at all of the positives, all of her strengths, rather than looking at myself with pity. um,
Mm,
and
mm,
what the biggest
mm,
lesson that I've learned from that, Anissa, is that we need to be open and honest and raw about our experiences, our emotions, our challenges and insecurities with our children, because they need to
mm.
see us as human beings with flaws and with doubts about ourselves, with our own insecurities, and not as these super role models, superhumans. Because when you
Yes.
have that expectation and then things aren't going the way that you will never ever look at it from a place of understanding. So for me,
No.
when I went through my divorce, I didn't address it with my son, in the sense that I didn't explain it to him as to what the reasons were from my point of view. And
Mm,
after
mm,
about 2 or 3 years, because my son was not settled after the divorce, um, I got really fantastic advice from a very good friend who said, sit him down and be honest about your journey. Be honest about why you made the decisions that you made. And that was the best thing that I could have ever done, um,
mhm,
for the development, for the closeness, for nurturing and maintaining a healthy relationship with my son. Because all of a sudden now he had a different perspective, because he grew up then thinking, my mom's done this. My mom, we alone here because of my mom. She made those decisions. And,
yeah.
there's misguided animosity, and that's what causes the unsettling and the inability to continue with the life in a healthy manner. So that was the best um, decision that I could have made, to be honest with him about me and about being a human being. And this extends through different stages in your child's life. It extends to when you are ready now to date again, maybe,
Mm,
and
mm,
your child, especially I don't know, a son, is very possessive over their mothers. You know, they're seen as your protector, they're seen there as your bodyguards,
Darling,
and they don't want to let
I'm doing that
another.
with my daughter. I've got that with my daughter at the moment. Neither of my sons, my 9-year-old told me, I'm going to say this publicly, but he was telling me that the neighbor is the type of guy that I should consider again. So and my daughter would be the opposite. No, 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 no. I don't think you need to date now, Mom. My older one
Yeah,
couldn't give a damn.
yeah.
So,
But you know,
but you're
Anissa, it
right.
changes. Yeah, it changes as they grow
Mhm.
as well. And as they let go of you, as they're becoming more independent in their lives. Because initially, my son was absolutely not. No ways. This is not happening. It's the two of us, and that's it. If you're
Yes.
lonely, you can, I will, and I'm grown, we'll get you a cat or a dog to keep you company, right? Until he started having his own life. And you know, at some point he was like, Mom, don't you want to date, don't you want to be with someone, why don't you have another child? You know, so
Yes.
yeah, and it's different for each parent as you go along, but I think that there are some basic um, guidelines, I think, which would have been helpful if someone had told us while you're going through
Yes.
this new experience. And maybe that's why, you know, that's what we can do, is to just share it. And I think maybe we should just leave a few of these pointers in the comments, you know, for any new parents who are going through this, just to get some idea of how other parents are handling it. um
Just an
but
observation. I just want to say normally we don't have comments feeding through from YouTube to
mm,
StreamYard. And it seems like your local girl, Caitlin, hello, hello for joining us. And Kaylee, that's joining us,
okay.
who's saying hi and then bye. But thank you for being here. Yeah, thank you for joining us from YouTube. So that's an interesting change for today. Jamila, I just want to come back to what you were saying earlier on, in terms of taking on that new relationship. It is a difficult one as well because now you're bringing in potentially a blended family dynamic if the other person also has kids.
Yes.
And and I must admit, I guess that is potentially one of the reasons that I am so resistant to explore moving out into the dating world again. Because the idea of either a blended family or having a partner come into my kid's life is not an easy decision to make. So I
No.
say that in the same vein where my mom will constantly, like we said the last time we were having discussions, she will constantly say to me, but for us women, when we get older, it's not easy to move on to a new partner. For men, they can go well into their 60s and 70s and find themselves a young 30-year-old, and then that's okay. But for us, it's so difficult. So I want to ask you this question because it's something that I'm truly struggling with. Like, I cannot fathom the idea of bringing another male figure into my kid's life because they are still young, number one. And then another conversation for another day. There are all these crazy things that happen, when you do introduce your kid into a new family dynamic. But more than that, it's also, when there's this blended family and now you're needing to almost merge the two families and the parenting styles. And I mean, in my relationship with my spouse, when I was married and in the co-parenting, we are so different. He wants to
Mm.
be the friend and bee's knees, and I'm the strict, disciplined
Discipline.
boundaries and
Mm.
structure. So
Yes. Yeah.
imagine somebody new. So tell me, have you ever explored having like a serious relationship and when your kid was younger, when your son was younger? And what was that stance you took? Should you have pursued it if you considered it at the time?
Well, like I said to you, my experience has been different because up until my son was like already, in matric and gone to university, that was what my whole life was about. My life was just about
Mm,
him and about building my career in order to support me. And so I didn't have that, um, during the years when he was growing up. But I did get into a relationship later on when my son was at university, and
mm,
it became a serious relationship. And um, um, the guy that I was in the relationship with was um, very mature, and he wanted to meet my son, and he said that, I mean, we were at this point discussing marriage, um and I said, okay, fine, meet my son, which was like a huge deal for me now, because there's no one
yes.
that I had introduced my son to as a potential partner. And I remember we were having coffee. And the first thing my son said to him after meeting him, he sat down at the table and he says, "So, what are your intentions with my mom?" And it took
How
me
old
by,
was he? How old
no,
was your
he
son
was
then?
probably, my son was probably about, he was 20 then. And
Yes.
I felt I was taken aback, but at the same time, I felt so proud of him. And not only proud of
Mm,
him, I felt so protected, and I was felt proud of him in the way that he handled it, because I felt that he was being quite mature about it. He was thinking about
mm,
my interests and not just his. So I could see that it was, he wasn't coming from a selfish place at all. And look, he had a good relationship um, with my ex, but here's the difference: is that my ex had a much younger son, and he was 6 at the time. And
oh
for
my
me,
gosh.
yeah, but for me, I think because I always wanted to have more children, um,
Yes.
I, I developed a very strong bond with the little boy. And
Mm,
I think more than anything, that's one of the deepest regrets that I have about the relationship ending, is that it meant that my relationship with that little boy, who I saw
oh
as my
man.
son, that I wanted to take in as my son, um, that also ended. So, would I say in hindsight, I shouldn't have gone into it? I shouldn't have developed the love and the bond that I had for the little boy? Absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm at a stage in my life where I realize that, we are placed in this existence to experience different learning curves and lessons
Sure.
in our life. And I would rather see all of the beautiful positives, and the beautiful lessons that were meant for me to have taken from that experience than to look at anything that could be deemed as negative. So
Absolutely.
I had the privilege of loving a little boy like my own, even though it was for a specific period of time. But I had that privilege, and I think it gave me some sort of satisfaction, um, for that craving of having wanted to have more kids. Um, so there's always positives that come out of it, and by no means should it stop you, I think, from trying your hand at another relationship, giving it another go, because you need to, first of all, trust yourself. And if
Mm,
you're able to
mm,
trust yourself, then you know that you're not being reckless, you're not
mm.
being misguided in any way, um, by getting into a relationship. So having that trust in you, knowing who you are, and making the decision to go forward from there will ensure and give you that peace of mind of knowing that you would never ever put your child in harm's way, or allow them to be in any situation where it could be detrimental for them, or where they'd feel any type of insecurity or anything like that. So I think where we are at in our lives and the continuous learning process that we are going through, will we need to trust in that and allow that to be a guide into deciding whether you want to be in a relationship. And we all deserve to be with someone. we're not we're not meant to be alone. We want to have connections. We're a part of something so much greater. We're connected to every other thing out there, every little atom out there in the universe. So why shouldn't we have somebody that we want, who is going to be by our side, who we can have a relationship with, who we can learn from, who we can be happy with? We should never ever deprive ourselves of that.
I'm very grateful for today's discussion because it's always near and dear to my heart. We've already reached the end of today, and it just feels like you and I could carry on today because it's such a topic that's dear to my heart in terms of making sure that we become more conscious as parents and as models, role models for our kids out there. What would be the parting wisdom that you'd leave with the audience here in terms of parenthood, your identity, self-discovery, and your purpose, given that that was today's theme? In 30 seconds, what would you say?
I think for new parents, it's very important for you to be kind to yourself and not to have the demands and expectations that society places on you to be of your main focus. I think it's important for you to be able to bear yourself as a human being first to your child. A human being who has weaknesses and strengths, and who doesn't always make the right decision all the time, but it's okay. So I think it's that acceptance of who you are, acceptance and knowing that whatever I'm doing, it is with the best of intentions, and I'm doing to the best of my ability with the tools that I have in place. And just to be honest with your kids. But at the same time, not to succumb to societal demands and pressures, and also just to have that confidence in yourself. Because being a parent is also an innate strength that we have within us, that we are all given as human beings. And sometimes we need to trust that and to go with it. So
thank you
that's
for
my
that,
2 cents.
I appreciate that. Those that joined us on Instagram and stayed all the time, thank you so much for being here, and for our latest, newest YouTube participants that are watching, thank you. My last and final comment will be, your triggers are your treasures. So when you are triggered, understand where they are coming from. See them as blessings, not as a curse, for you to do whatever is necessary to become the best, most conscious version of the parent that you would have wanted for yourself. And to give grace to our parents that they only did the best that they could with what they had. And I think that stems also from Jamila's experience from her mom. They weren't doing it intentionally to hurt or harm us, but to set us up to be better and more equipped as parents. So I'm not going to keep anyone much longer. I'm going to end today's live, and we'll be back next week, Friday again. And for those watching the replay, thank you for coming to watch and share your thoughts as well. On that note, Jamila, I'm ending the live. Thank
you,
you.
Anissa. Bye, everybody.